Well, the U.S. is reporting more than 700,000 cases of coronavirus nationwide as states begin to weigh when to relax social distancing measures. A key issue in that decision is testing for COVID-19. President Trump says he's providing enough help for states to make their own choices. But some governors say the federal government needs to ramp up test kits. It comes as protesters in Virginia, Minnesota, and Michigan are demanding an end to quarantine, while the president appears to be egging them on through Twitter. Michael George reports on the growing tension between the president and the states.
President Trump defended his administration's record on coronavirus testing.
We've already built sufficient testing capacity nationwide for states to begin their reopenings.
The president said the country has conducted over 3.7 million tests so far, more than any other country.
Governors are responsible for testing.
Vice President Pence said testing availability is sufficient for states to begin the first phase of the president's guidelines for reopening the country. But some governors disagree.
The president doesn't want to help on testing. He said 11 times, I don't want to get involved in testing. It's too complicated. It's too hard.
Earlier Friday, the president posted tweets saying, "Liberate Virginia, Michigan, and Minnesota," among the states where protesters have rallied against stay-at-home orders.
These are people expressing their views. I see where they are, and I see the way they're working. They seem to be very responsible people to me.
Each of the three states is following guidelines from the president's own task force.
I feel like our jobs are all essential in the state of Minnesota.
Michigan's governor says protesters who don't follow social distancing guidelines could cause stay-at-home orders to be extended.
I hope that if people are going to dissent, that they do so in a manner that doesn't compromise their safety or the safety of others.
In Falls Church, Virginia, people waited in line outside this fabric store, many hoping to buy material for makeshift masks recommended by the CDC.
Well, I work for the nursing field, and we all need masks. Our patients need masks, so we have to buy supplies in order to make sure our patients are protected.
And Boston's mayor urged people not to run the Boston Marathon route on Monday. The annual race has been postponed until September because of the coronavirus. Michael George, CBS News.
And correspondent Nikole Killion joins me now. Nikole, what more is the White House saying about testing, and what did the president's own medical experts say about the testing procedure across the country?
Well, good to see you, Rena. And the White House Coronavirus Task Force held a pretty extensive briefing Friday night where they outlined some of the steps that the federal government is taking when it comes to testing and kind of where things stand in terms of capability and capacity. That was a slide presentation that was made by several of the health officials on the president's task force. And they say at this point some 3.7 million tests have been carried out and that labs and hospitals are doing about 120,000 per day, although many argue that needs to be ramped up further. The vice president did say, as did the president, that there is sufficient testing capacity and capability, at least to move through this first phase of reopening. But some experts on the president's panel wouldn't necessarily say if there would be enough to move into that phase 2 period. Specifically, Dr. Birx made that comment as saying that, what happens in phase 1 will inform phase 2. Dr. Anthony Fauci, another notable member of the president's task force, also talked a little bit about testing and acknowledged that there were some problems at the outset, but said that things have since been corrected. And he also tried to kind of tamp down these calls for testing, noting that testing is certainly very important and key in terms of trying to control this outbreak, but that is not the only part of the equation, that it also involves mitigation.
And we saw there's some of the feud between Governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, and the president there. It appears that the president's own messaging conflicts with what the White House guidelines are. What's the White House saying about this? How do they move forward if the president's messaging is so different?
Well, I think as far as this feud between the president and New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is concerned, a lot of this really stems more from this notion of appreciation. We certainly have heard the president time and again say that he wants governors to be appreciative of the efforts that the federal government is doing. And so, Friday in particular, New York's governor really kind of took aim at the federal response, very critical of the response when it comes to testing, saying that it's important to have more support from the federal government. The president kind of appeared to be watching this and said that the governor should start doing rather than complaining. But also, you heard New York's governor as well saying in terms of this notion of appreciation, how many times do I have to say thank you? Do I have to buy you flowers? I mean, at the end of the day, and this is something he reiterated again in his press conference Saturday, is saying that it's really important to have that partnership with the federal government as far as testing is concerned, having access to the international supply chain. That's a role that the federal government can play. And he also did try to strike a more conciliatory tone as well, saying that this is really, once again, not about politics, that we should all be united and stay together in this difficult time.
And Nikole, sources tell CBS News that the vice president was sparring with senators over the president's tweets that appear to be supporting this anti-quarantine message. How is the president defending those tweets? And are governors concerned that they now have to band together because of the message that the president is sending?
Oh, well, of course, these were all these tweets we saw by the president on Friday where he wrote liberate Minnesota, liberate Michigan, liberate Virginia in response to some of these protests that we have seen around the country as some people, many of them, the president's supporters, have come out in defiance of some of these stay-at-home orders to a certain extent, some of them not wearing masks and still gathering in large crowds at some of these venues. The president asked about that, saying that he believes that these people are being responsible and doing the responsible thing, and that he does think that some of the state's measures are too harsh.
Speaking of the economy, I want to ask you, there are now 22 million Americans who are unemployed. This week, the government's Paycheck Protection Program ran out of money. What's the status? What's the White House saying about funding that? And where do people go at this point?
Well, we do have some new information to report on that front. A Democratic source tells me that talks are continuing this weekend between Democratic staff and staff of Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. We also know from Democratic aides that they have presented a new package to the administration. In essence, this is a package that would not only include more money for this small business loan program. Right now, of course, the request on the table is $250 billion, but Democrats also want to add more funding for hospitals. Also, this compromise offer is said to include additional funding for states and local governments as well, approximately $150 billion, we're told. So, again, these talks continue, and there seems to be a bit of an opening here. As you know, there's kind of been a stalemate over this, with Republicans really wanting a clean bill, just strictly re-upping this program for small businesses and nothing else, and no other strings attached. Democrats have been pushing for this additional funding for hospitals and states, and just on Friday, the president said that he is now open to, for instance, adding this extra funding for hospitals. Also, another key Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, also indicated a willingness as well. So certainly we'll be continuing to monitor those negotiations, especially as we know the Senate will be back on Monday.
Yeah, that's good to know. Nikole Killion, thank you very much for joining us.